The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
The Derbyshire Dales series is sponsored by Gainsborough Cycles, 01427 617 752. For all your cycling needs, this is your one-stop shop located at 20 Ropery Road, Gainsborough, or online at gainsboroughcycles.com. There's a link in the description. Gainsborough Cycles, ask for Trevor Halstead. Welcome back to the Derbyshire Dales again, people. I've just been greeted in this little place with the absolutely fantastic little chimes of the clock that you can see on that building over there. Very cute little bell. Absolutely brilliant. We'll check out what that clock is in a few minutes and what the building is that it is on the side of. I'm beginning this episode at the end of a road called South View, and there is quite a good view here. Let me show you. Over there you can see into the Dales, and it looks gorgeous, and I imagine the rest of this village is going to look gorgeous as well, because it's a nice day today. There's a patch of blue sky up there. I've got the sunglasses on, the hats on. This is the wonderful Pilsley. Pilsley, Pinnell's Clearing. This week on TVI we're back in the Derbyshire Dales. Now for a long time there's been an area of the Dales on the eastern side bordering both Sheffield and North East Derbyshire that's been screaming at me to go and cover. I've passed through it several times to get to other places, but now it's time to take it on. There are some lovely villages in this section, and you won't find many that are more beautiful than Pilsley. Sharing its name with another village in North East Derbyshire, the Dales version of Pilsley lies close to the Chatsworth House estate. In fact, it's so close that most of it belongs to Chatsworth actually. For over 100 years, Pilsley has not changed one jot. It sits on a spur leading north from the B6048, which connects Chatsworth and Enser to Bakewell. Small, compact and full of buildings which look really old, Pilsley was one of the villages that housed the workers of the Chatsworth estate. It still does to some degree. The village is literally the only place of habitation in the parish. Otherwise, the land covered here is either farmland or woodland. The A619 forms the boundary to the north. Even though this one is tiny, it has a relatively good number of things to discuss. Pilsley has a school built by the same man who was behind the railway station at Roseley, Joseph Paxton. It stands on the village green, a delightful patch of open space in the middle of the village, flanked otherwise only by the main street. Follow that north and you'll be at the Devonshire Arms pub. There are two shops here as well, one which is very much Chatsworth themed. Let's walk and see what living next to Chatsworth House is all about. We start at the local allotments on South View. I know these aren't the greatest of features for everybody, but at least now the fans are on side. You know who you are. Pilsley is an estate village closely linked to the Chatsworth House estate. Many of the estate's workers live here and have done for many years. It hasn't changed at all since the 19th century, but before that there was a massive alteration, and it was all down to Chatsworth itself. Pilsley as we know it now was rebuilt in the 19th century by the 6th Duke of Devonshire, who felt the original village was unsightly when viewed from Chatsworth House. Some bits do remain from the 1700s, but most of the place dates from the 1830s. Known for its gritstone cottages, the village has a long history. Its location near Chatsworth House and its connection to the estate make it a charming destination for visitors, even though it's quite small. Education in Pilsley revolves around two buildings. The main one is the school built by Joseph Paxton in 1849. He was the architect behind the old railway station at Roseley. The school could accommodate 122 pupils at first, who would have sat in rows on benches. During the 1950s, the school was used by Pilsley's villagers for concerts with a partition to divide the main classroom from a stage. Different villages had their own specialty acts that they would perform to entertain the audience of their friends and neighbours. Prior to the building of the Scout Hut at the top of the High Street in the 1970s, the school was also used by the Chatsworth Scout Troop too. In 1968, the school faced closure as there were only 8 pupils attending it. However, the closure of Beeley School and an influx from Baslow helped to save it. These events helped Pilsley become quite successful. Paxton's original school building remains in use today, but it's been extended somewhat since it was built, on 4 separate occasions no less. The first time was in 1950 when a kitchen was added, and other add-ons came along in 1969, 1998 and 2002. It could so easily have been a different story though. Now, the clock on the gable end is by Smith & Sons of Derby. It's the village's war memorial, erected after World War I in memory of Alan Bowring, Harry Brumby, John Fernley and George Edward Siddle. In 1945, there was a remembrance service at the school for those who died in World War II, led by the 10th Duke of Devonshire of Chatsworth House. They lost their eldest son in that war. Many of Pilsley's pupils are the children of Chatsworth Estate employees. Since 2004, there's been a second building that has aided education in this village. We'll come to that in a little while. It's a nice quiet morning here in Pilsley, but I imagine it's like this most of the day, quite frankly, because this isn't exactly a thriving urban metropolis now, is it? It's kind of a different story than the one we'll see tomorrow, which is literally just a mile up the road, but that's a different story. Anyway, here in Pilsley, opposite the school, you have this gorgeous green. Let's talk a bit about this. Recreational space is a little limited in this village. Then again, that's perhaps to be expected given Pilsley is so small. There are no playing fields or sports clubs here, but there is a village green. The green is perhaps Pilsley's best bit. Unspoilt and characterful and lined with some attractive little rocks, the school children have this fabulous view over it every day. As a central feature, the green and its surrounding area are central to community life here, contributing immensely to the village's close-knit feel. All around the green are great examples of estate workers' housing. Both the green and the properties around it are part of a conservation area adopted in 1997. In terms of shops, you'd expect a place like Pilsley to have next to nothing given its size. You'd be very wrong to assume that. Pilsley has 2 shops, one a general store, the other not so. On the main street is a business called the Village Shop and Post Office. This is the only remaining shop within the village. Alongside the school and the pub which we're about to see, this forms a central part of Pilsley's community life. The village post office used to be located elsewhere. It was formerly within a castellated lodge at the entrance to the village, but later moved to be within this shop. Industrially, farming is the largest occupation here. The village is surrounded by a mixture of farmland and woodland, which is all put to good use. Pilsley was, and to an extent still is, a self-sufficient village. It had a number of trades, including a local blacksmith. The old smithy still stands in the centre of the village near the green. However, times change, and because of that, Pilsley now has several businesses on a small industrial estate at the northern end of the village. On this estate, there's an eclectic mix of stuff ranging from a financial advisor's to an interior designer's. There's a good reason to visit this industrial estate as a tourist too. On the estate is an art gallery. Named the Wildlife Gallery, it's run by a guy called Richard Whittleston. Ever since he sold his first painting in the long hot summer of 1976, Whittleston has become one of the UK's most loved and respected wildlife artists. Working in acrylics, watercolour and oils, he draws inspiration from his deep love of the Derbyshire countryside, as well as his own encyclopedic knowledge of birds and other wildlife. The Wildlife Gallery has lots of originals, plus a selection of limited edition prints and cards. Richard works most days in his studio and is on hand to discuss art commissions and his latest projects. With stunning countryside views and ample parking on this industrial estate, the gallery is well worth a visit any time of year. Now, if you drive into Pilsley using the road that passes the gallery, this is the view you get when you enter the village. It's quite nice, isn't it? It's slightly uphill. To the left, you have a phone box and this beautiful little windmill. I wonder what this is all about. Let's have a little look at this, because this is one of the first things I saw on the left hand side when I came in. That's quite cool, isn't it? I wonder, Pilsley, did it ever have a windmill? I definitely didn't find one in research before coming here. Let's have a look in the phone box while we're in this area. This street, by the way, is called Bun Alley for some strange reason. Why it gets that name, I've no idea. Was there a bakery on it, potentially? Ah, it's a book exchange. Pretty standard for a red phone box these days in rural England. Right, let's turn around, because now we're going this way towards the pub, which is there. That's the Pilsley Inn. Pilsley has just the one pub, and it's been going for quite a long time, 300 years in fact. It faces down Main Street towards the Chatsworth Road. Providing accommodation for the Dales tourist, these days it's called the Pilsley Inn. It used to be known as the Devonshire Arms instead, in reference to the owners of Chatsworth House. There used to be another pub in Pilsley at one time. It was called the Talbot Inn. When it closed as a pub, it was altered slightly and turned into a cottage. The Pilsley Inn offers 13 bedrooms, which include some 4-poster beds in some of them. They help showcase it as the perfect place to stay for Chatsworth and the rest of the Peak District. Dining at the Pilsley Inn is an experience in itself. It styles itself on very sophisticated pub food. Drinks include excellent local ales, including Chatsworth Gold. Now, religiously, there's never been an Anglican church in this village. It's one thing Pilsley has lacked throughout its entire existence. It used to have a chapel, though. Today, the former Wesleyan chapel, located within just a few paces of the Devonshire Arms, has now been converted into a computer room for the school. Talk about a change of use. To complete the route around Pilsley, all we have to do is walk to the end of this road, the High Street, and follow the footpath at the end. Beyond the High Street, several paths lead off into lovely woodland walks. The main track was once a pack horse route used to transport lead from Moneyash to the coast. As a footpath now, it will take you south between some fields and onto the B6048. If you turn left onto that, you pass the entrance to the Chatsworth Farm Shop before Pilsley returns to view once again. Okay, we found our way to the road that passes Pilsley to the south, and our last landmark on this walk is about 100 metres or so up here on the right hand side. Now, the eagle-eyed among you may have noticed that when we were at the shop in the village just there, that it's actually empty. The scripts I write these days, I write them before I come to a place, which is why I said in that it's still going, but apparently it's not. If you look on the maps and things of Pilsley though, it will still be marked as a shop, so don't be fooled, you can't get anything there at the moment. It's completely empty. However, Pilsley does have another shop to its name, although this one is not about the locals, this one's about the tourists. Whilst the shop and post office caters for the locals within the village, outside of Pilsley, the Chatsworth Farm Shop on the B6048 caters to the tourists. As a Chatsworth themed and owned shop, it sells estate produce. It was established in the former Shire Horse stables in 1977, and 30 years later it was employing more than 100 people. The majority of its products are produced or prepared on the Chatsworth estate, or sourced from suppliers within 30 miles. The Pilsley Inn sources much of its produce through the farm shop, including estate-reared meat, freshly baked bread, and beer from local breweries like Peak Ales and Thornbridge. The farm shop was expanded in 2004 to include a 90-seat restaurant. That's a well-known landmark in these parts, and it's as popular as ever some 20 years down the line. Alright, that's Pilsley in the books, and that makes a total of 50 complete now in the Derbyshire Dales. Now, you'd think, being so close to Chatsworth, that would be next. You'll have to wait for that one though, people. Tomorrow we're off to the north to catch a pair of villages that both begin with the letter B. See you there. Welcome back to the Derbyshire Dales again, people. I've been looking forward to this one for quite a while. A lot of you guys who are regular visitors to the Dales will know this place. You drive through this to get to Chatsworth House. You also drive through it to get to Bakewell. There are loads of pubs and shops and touristy type things here. There used to even be a hydropathic hotel. This is Baslow and Bubnell. Baslow and Bubnell, Bass's Burial Mound and Bubba's Hill. Today on TVI we come to a parish that has two settlements that both begin with the letter B. They are Baslow and Bubnell, and they sit on either side of the River Derwent near Chatsworth House and 3.5 miles away from Bakewell. Baslow and Bubnell, although two separate places, are often referred to simply as Baslow collectively, seeing as Bubnell is little more than just one street on the riverbank. You can divide this one into at least 4 areas. Bubnell is one of them, and the other 3 are Overend, Netherend and Bridgend. All of them have their own distinctive character. Bridgend is where the Derwent is spanned by its charming 17th century 3-arched bridge, which sits next to an old stone shelter built for its former watchman. Netherend has what's called a goose green, a triangular paddock with trees and thatched cottages overlooking a brook, and that's popular with visitors. Overend has some of the newer properties in the village, and at one time had a hydropathic hotel where visitors would come to heal their ailments using the local water. There are many historical features within Baslow and Bubnell, including the Wellington Monument, the Nelson Monument, the Victoria Stone and the Eagle Stone. There are loads of pubs, shops and facilities here too, because it's a go-to place for visitors to Chatsworth, being located so close to the estate. Baslow is also known well for another reason, the huge gritstone escarpments that overlook it. Legend has it one of them had to be climbed by local men before they could marry. Luckily, I'm already a married man. Let's get going. Baslow and Bubnell is often referred to as one village, but it's a village that has several distinct areas. Our walk begins in Bubnell on the western bank of the River Derwent. Bubnell is an often forgotten area of Baslow simply because it's really just one street. It has some interesting buildings though. Bridgefoot Farm is one of them. Bubnell Hall is the most prestigious building in either Baslow or Bubnell and dates from the mid-1600s or perhaps even earlier. Its first known occupant was Robert Eyre. Many prominent local families have occupied the hall and its adjacent farmhouse, but all were tenants as the ownership lay with the Duke of Rutland. Between 1841 and 1898, the hall acted as a girls' school, attracting pupils from across the north of England and even one from the United States of America. Cross Farm may well be one of the oldest buildings in the area. It takes its name from a medieval cross once situated close by, now removed to the entrance of Baslow's churchyard. Bubnell House may well be the original manor house. It has a vaulted cellar and a door lintel of Saxon origin, and is also said to have monastic connections. Okay, so in stark contrast to Pilsley, which you saw yesterday, this is only a mile down the road, but it's a lot noisier. The reason for that is quite simple, because we've hit the main road here. If you're on this road, you're probably heading towards Chesterfield in this direction and to Bakewell in the other. A lot of cars use this. Now, we need to find our way to Baslow, which is over there where that roundabout is. But we also need to talk a little bit about this bridge that we're stood on. To get into Baslow, we have to cross the River Derwent. There are two ways you can do that here. One way is to use Baslow Bridge near the church, but we'll do that later. The other way is to use this bridge, the one that carries the A619 Bakewell Road. No sooner have you crossed this bridge, you'll hit a big roundabout where the A619 becomes Church Lane. Sports and recreation wise, Baslow and Bubnell can offer lots of facilities for a number of different activities. It has a huge sports ground off Church Lane, simply known as the Baslow Sports Field. This is where the local football team play. Baslow Football Club compete in the Hope Valley Amateur League, and they have a junior section in the Derwent Valley League too. Baslow Cricket Club are also based here. They have 3 senior teams. The first and second 11 Saturday teams compete in the Yorkshire and Derbyshire Cricket League. Their third side, a Sunday team, plays friendly matches in and around the region. They also have a junior section that plays in the Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire Border League. Although you can't play golf on these grounds, Baslow used to be a destination for those who like to wield a 9-iron now and again. Now defunct, there used to be a golf club out to the east of the village. Named the Baslow Grand Hotel Golf Club, it was founded in 1896. The course still appears on OS maps in the 1930s. A lot of people come to Chatsworth, especially when it's nice. There are 2 entrances to Chatsworth Park here in Baslow. We'll see one of them in a little while. I've just walked past the other one. It's close to the sports field down there. Now, one of them is favoured over the other one these days. The one we'll see in a bit is the one that's not used very often. We'll explain why when we reach it. But before we get there, we've got a load of other things to cover. So between here and the next landmark, which is this hotel on the right hand side, there's a surgery. Now, Baslow has quite a history when it comes to medicine. Off to the left, just after the sports field, Baslow has a health centre. Although it's just a run-of-the-mill surgery, Baslow has a long tradition of providing local healthcare. Early doctors, like Dr. Condell for example, served as both GPs and physicians to the Duke of Devonshire. Condell's successor was Dr. Edmund Wrench. Keep that name in mind. Wrench made a significant impact on the village, and his son Edward followed in his footsteps as a doctor. Later, Dr. Richard Edelston married Dr. Wrench's daughter and took over this practice. It later evolved with the advent of the NHS, and the BBC even documented a year in its life. It was called the Real Peak Practice. Nether End now, which is where the majority of Baslow's hospitality venues are. It has several hotels, pubs and restaurants. Here's one of them, the Cavendish Hotel, which is an old coaching inn. This predates the road it stands on. It was here long before a turnpike was first referenced in 1730 through Baslow. At that time, the innkeeper was John Marsden. It was originally known as the Peacock, which was a reference to the arms of its original owner, the Duke of Rutland. When sitting on the turnpike, it served travellers making their way between Chesterfield and Buxton. These days, it's more about what it can do for tourists. As one of 2 staging inns in the village, both present by the early 1700s, this would have been a welcome sight for travellers, especially in bad weather. The Duke of Devonshire acquired it in 1860, but only after refurbishment in 1970 was the name changed to Cavendish to reflect that of his family. Next, we have the village hall. Originally known as the Stockdale Institute, it was built in 1907 by the Stockdale family on land purchased from the Duke of Rutland. It was named in honour of the Stockdale family, particularly the Reverend Jeremiah Stockdale, a long-serving vicar of Baslow. The Stockdales were major benefactors to the village. Many of their number are buried in the churchyard, and there are memorials within the church too. And where better than the village hall to liberate myself of one of these things. There's a parish notice board here, so you know what that means, people. that is Baslow officially done. Now that card might be seen by quite a few people because people come to the village hall obviously, but a load more come to our next landmark. Now, next to the village hall, there's a big car park where lots of visitors to Baslow often choose to leave their cars for a walk around the place or through Chatsworth Park. This car park has a lot more than meets the eye. This was the site of Baslow Gasworks, built in 1864, a very early gasworks for a village of this size. It provided gas and coke for the village and for something called the hydro, which we'll come to later. You can tell it was a thriving plant too. There are scorch marks on the walls in the southeast of the site. The original gateposts of the plant still stand near the bus stop close by. It closed in 1963, but many original gas lamps, which have now been converted to electricity, are still visible around the village. Now, Baslow has several shops and attractions for the tourists. Most of them in Netherend are located around the village green, sometimes known as the Goose Green. It would be a little impossible to highlight them all, so let's just focus on one of them. This is the Cafe on the Green, the history of which goes back to at least 1851. At that time, this was a grocer's shop, run at first by Joseph Stewart and then by his widow. Various families took it over thereafter, including the Whites, the Marples and the Ellises. Thomas Ellis was here in 1901. His daughter ran the chip shop next door. It ceased to be a general shop in the 1960s when instead it sold antiques. Now the Cafe on the Green, it's not uncommon to see this heaving with cyclists at the weekend. They do love a run through Baslow, quite regularly in fact. Being located close to Chatsworth, a lot of Baslow properties were owned by either the Duke of Rutland or the Duke of Devonshire. However, a few belonged to neither. Some in Netherend here belonged to the heir family of Hassop, but the freehold was sold to local residents in 1702. That makes them unusual. This odd setup might have allowed their later commercial development into a line of shops and two inns, and that brings us to our next building. Look closely at some of the properties around you here, and you may spot one called Malt House near Bar Brook. It belonged to the Barrel Inn, which was located behind its replacement, the Devonshire Arms. This was built in 1851. Despite the name, the Duke of Devonshire never owned this pub. As the Barrel Inn, it was trading by at least 1800. The Devonshire Arms was designed to be a much grander and more attractive replacement because the idea was to cater to the early tourist trade. Now, of course, it's still relatively early in the morning right now, so these places aren't up and running fully yet. But trust me, with the sun up today, these will be heaving later. They are Derbyshire Dales tourist magnets, let me tell you. Okay, let's continue walking this way, and we've got another pub to see next. It's the Wheatsheaf Hotel on the left-hand side, up there. The final pub in Netherend is the Wheatsheaf, the second of the two staging inns on the Chesterfield to Buxton Turnpike. Originally a homestead with arable land, an orchard and wood, it later became a coaching inn providing rest and refreshment along the route. It may have also served as a shelter for a toll collector and a place where locals stopped miscreants from entering the village. Of all the pubs in Baslow, this is the one that has the least that's really known about it. However, it makes up for that, seeing as it's the first thing you see on entering from the east. Just outside Netherend and the village itself are the so-called Golden Gates, which date from the first Duke of Devonshire's rebuilding of Chatsworth House. They were moved here by Sir Joseph Paxton for William Cavendish, the 6th Duke of Devonshire in the 19th century, to make a new entrance to Chatsworth Park. It was a requirement because the park hasn't always touched Baslow. It was extended northwards towards the village in the 1830s. The Golden Gates are rarely used now though. The main entrance to Chatsworth is elsewhere, and these are usually only opened for large public events. Okay, after that little walk back to the village green, we're now heading up into Overend. Now, I imagine this is a part of Baslow that's very seldom seen. All the good stuff is around the green and to do with Chatsworth, literally just behind it. How many people walk up here, I wonder? I imagine it's not very many. There are a few bits and bobs up here, though, including the former Hydropathic Hotel. Next, we find ourselves in Overend, a residential area on the hillside to the north of Netherend. This is generally seen as the newest area of the village. Overend used to have one of Baslow's most well-known features. Near the junction of Bar Road and Gorsebank Lane, there was a large hydropathic hotel which was demolished in 1936. In the late 19th century, the hotel was built for people to come and take the cure. They were believers that Baslow's waters would help joint and muscle pain. The Baslow Hydro was the 19th century equivalent of a luxury spa hotel these days. It occupied the whole of the area between Bar Road and what is now Eaton Drive. Its gardens stretched further down Eaton Hill, and the golf course we mentioned earlier was towards the Sheffield Road. The Hydro was opened in 1881 by a Sheffield businessman looking to develop a local competitor to the spa towns of Matlock and Buxton. The established Baslow infrastructure, including a ready gas supply, good scenery and the attractions of Chatsworth, led to a highly successful venture until after World War I. A lack of post-war investment led to its deterioration. Nothing remains of the hotel now, but on its site there's a small cul-de-sac called Hydro Close in reference to it. The other clue remaining to its existence are a pair of large gateposts. Otherwise, the Hydro is a long-forgotten Baslow attraction. This oak tree on the triangular green at the centre of Overend is first noted on a map dating from 1879. It marks the meeting of 4 routes. They are the one from the Old Bridge, the one from Carver via Overlane, the one from Chesterfield via Eaton Hill, and the one from Sheffield via Bar Road. It must have been an important crossroads and meeting place in a village that had no true centre, and still doesn't to this day, really. Okay, there are 2 shops in Baslow. There's the Co-op, which we'll come to in a little while, and then here in Overend, you've got this one as well. Overend has a few shops and retail facilities to its name. It's like a scaled down version of Netherend in effect. The village shop and post office forms the main focus of life up here. This area follows the old route into the village from Bridgend via Overlane, the main access from that direction as late as 1812. This land was freehold, and the random building configuration suggests that the original freeholder sold small plots for individual development. This allowed the siting of Hanover buildings, or the Zion Chapel, the original Methodist chapel, and this former pub called the Alma, dating from 1854. It was originally a beer house. School Lane now, and here's the reason why it gets that name. This is St Anne's Primary School, built in 1876 on a site given by the Duke of Rutland. Prior to the founding of this building, a dame school, a type of kindergarten, was run by Miss Hibbert in a house called Orchard Cottage. Hibbert and her pupils transitioned to the new school building, which was at first referred to as the New School. Hibbert continued teaching here for many years thereafter. This is not the oldest purpose-built school in Baslow. The Methodist Sunday School is the oldest educational building in the village, and we'll see that in a moment. Originally, this was a national school, but became voluntary aided in 1950 and changed its name to St Anne's C of E Primary School thanks to its ties with the church just up the road. Our final landmark in Overend is Baslow Methodist Chapel. Originally built in 1796, this has a history tied to the early days of Methodism in the village. Baslow's first chapel was erected on land belonging to Ralph Penniston following the visit of Reverend Buckley in 1795. The building was initially used for making felt hats before being repurposed for Methodist worship. Later in the 1970s, the chapel would relocate to School Lane. You see, this is its Sunday school, built in 1822, which became part of the church when it was constructed. In 1978, a decision was taken to combine the two after renovating and extending the schoolroom. The chapel was originally in the Bakewell Wesleyan Circuit before becoming part of the North Derbyshire Mission in 1905 and then the Peak Methodist Circuit in 1944. Just had a really good heartwarming moment there. As I was filming the school and the Methodist chapel, I noticed there were some children in the playground, so that's why most of the shots of the school are from behind the wall. You can't see the playground. And initially I thought to myself, damn it, I'm going to have to be really careful here. But it actually turned into something really good, because the kids in the playground were playing What's the Time, Mr. Wolf, which I've obviously not heard or seen or played myself since I was a kid. So that was quite cool to listen to them doing that. Anyway, we are done with the school, we are done with the Methodist chapel, and we are now heading down towards another pub called the Prince of Wales. Now we're in Bridge End, named for the actual bridge over the Derwent, which is located behind St Anne's Church. Before we see the church, here's another pub for your viewing pleasure. This is the Prince of Wales, whose history stretches back to 1710. It evolved from a property called Keseyland, which had a house, a barn and workshops. It was later converted into cottages and used by various tradespeople before becoming the Prince of Wales Inn. It was used by a carpenter, a grocer, an ostler, shoemakers, a butcher and a wheelwright in the 19th century before its final transformation. On the edge of the churchyard is the Baslow and Bubnell War Memorial. It's a stone Celtic cross commemorating those from the two villages who died in World War I and World War II. It features 22 names from World War I and 13 from World War II. The memorial was dedicated on November the 27th, 1920, after the land was offered to the War Memorial Committee in July 1919. Now, St Anne's is both a beautiful and unusual church. The tower has two clocks, one with Roman numerals dated 1759 and another dated 1897. That one was installed to mark Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee. The word Victoria can be seen on it too. Inside the church, by the door, in a glass case, is a dog whip, which in the 17th and 18th centuries was used by an official dog whipper to keep stray dogs in order during services. The whip has a thong 3 feet long, which is still in excellent condition and is bound round the handle with leather. Some historians like to claim that as well as keeping dogs in check, it was also used to maintain order among worshippers. It was handy apparently for those who snored through services. St Anne's has an Anglo-Saxon coffin lid in the porch entrance, but the oldest part of the current building, the north aisle, dates from about 1200. The tower was constructed in the 13th century, but the rest of the church is newer and was the subject of an extensive restoration in the 19th century. A sundial lies in the church grounds atop the shaft, base and steps of an old cross. That may have acted as a market cross in the 17th century. A second cross, often called the Butter Cross, lies in the graveyard, which was moved from Bubnell by Dr. Wrench. He's buried in this very churchyard, by the way. Okay, out through the lit gates. And thank you. And we have a row here of a few shops. We've got one here called Simply Pale and Interesting. Not quite sure what that sells, to be honest with you. See some clothes in the window there. Next door to that we have Charlie's, this building here. It's like a cafe or a restaurant or something. And next door to that we have the chicken shed. And then the co-op is to the left of that, as you can see there. Now, we're going to talk about the co-op in a moment, but before we do, we need to head up this road a short distance towards the site of a former bus company. Now, until March this year, Bridge End had one of the village's best-known local companies, Hulley's of Baslow. They were an independent bus company which ran services across the Peak District, linking towns and villages with Sheffield, Chesterfield, Bakewell, Ashbourne, Glossop and Matlock. The origin of Hulley's can be traced back to 1914, when Henry Hulley purchased a Ford Model T and used it to run a taxi service from Baslow. By the 1920s, the company had expanded to run various bus services to Chesterfield and Bakewell, and it just kept growing. Through the acquisition of several small independent operators, the fleet soon had 7 buses and coaches, with excursions operated to York, Skegness, Southport and Blackpool. Henry Hulley died in 1955, with the business passing to his children and a coach being purchased in his memory. Hulley's would continue to serve Derbyshire for another 70 years. Following a period of poor performance, Derbyshire County Council stripped Hulley's of their contracts. On the 24th of March 2025, after 103 years of service, Hulley's ceased operations. There was a standoff here at the Baslow depot between numerous parties, including drivers who had lost wages as a result of the company's closure. Police were called after access to the depot was blocked by recovery vehicles. So, what happened to the services? Well, Derbyshire County Council awarded them to other local operators, including Andrews of Tideswell, Ashbourne Community Transport and Stagecoach Yorkshire. At the time of ceasing operations, Hulley's were operating 19 buses, most of which were single-deckers. They were a Peak District icon, but alas are no longer seen out here. Heading back from whence we came, our next job is to check out Baslow's co-op. This used to be a pub called the Rutland Arms. Originally it was called the Green Man and was one of several inns in Baslow owned by the Duke of Rutland. It was later renamed the Rutland Arms to reflect that before becoming this co-op store. It closed in around 2015. At one point it was made an asset of community value, but was removed from that list in 2016. The Rutland Arms used to suggest that Jane Austen stayed there whilst penning part of Pride and Prejudice. This is highly unlikely though. Whilst it's known that Austen did indeed stay in a pub called the Rutland Arms, the dates don't add up. Austen died in 1817, at which point this place was still called the Green Man. The far more likely scenario is that Austen stayed at the Rutland Arms in Bakewell, and we'll see that pub when we eventually hit the town. To get back to Bubnell, we need to cross the Derwent again, and that means crossing the exquisite Baslow Bridge. This is a Grade 1 listed building and a scheduled monument too. This is the old bridge over the Derwent. A date on one of its piers suggests it was built in 1609, making it the oldest structure in Baslow. The new bridge, the one that carries the A619 these days, was built in 1925 to replace this. That one's known as the Devonshire Bridge. That said, Baslow Bridge is still used. This is the oldest bridge across the Derwent never to have been destroyed by floods. At the northwestern end of the bridge is a stone-gabled watch hut. A lot of people believe this used to be a toll collector's hut, but it wasn't. This used to be manned daily to protect the village from bandits. One thing we haven't seen on our walk is something that would be quite hard to film without prior permission to. Here's a bit about Baslow Hall, just off the road to Carver. It was once occupied by Sebastian Ziani di Ferranti, the radio and electrical pioneer and inventor. Today it's Fisher's Restaurant. Grade 2 listed Baslow Hall was built in 1907 to the designs of Francis Holton Wrench of Sheffield on land bought from the Duke of Rutland for Mrs. Stockdale, the widow of a local reverend. It wasn't built without some controversy. The construction work caused some damage to the footpath along Carver Road, which the council refused to repair. The hall was put up for sale in 1911 when it was described as a commodious residence in the Tudor style of architecture, standing in its own grounds of about 8 acres. It was still being advertised for sale in 1912, but by 1913 the house had been purchased by Di Ferranti. With a 25 horsepower oil engine, he ran a private electrical plant at the hall until 1923. It powered many electrical devices, including an electric laundry, a lawnmower, and lighting for the hall's tennis court. The Di Ferranti lampposts still line the hall's drive today. After his death in 1930, the house was purchased by the Macree Thornhills of Stanton Hall as a wedding present for Humphrey Bache Christopher Davy. He occupied it until World War II. The house was then let to George Kenning, who occupied it until 1955. His son, Frank Kenning, died in the garage with a shot wound to his head in 1956. It was sold again to a second-hand car salesman and later sold to a retired London stockbroker. In 1988, it was purchased by the Fisher family and opened as the restaurant and hotel that it is today. As far as notable residents here go, one name sticks out more than most: Frederick Barker. Born in Baslow in 1808, he was the local vicar, but went on to become the Bishop of Sydney. Barker was, in fact, the second Anglican bishop of the Australian city. He was educated at the King's School in Grantham and Jesus College, Cambridge, where he graduated BA in 1831 and MA in 1839. He was made a deacon in 1831 by the Bishop of Rochester and a priest in 1832 before being placed in charge of the Perpetual Curacy of Upton in Cheshire. A 19-year spell in Liverpool followed, and it would take until 1854 for him to return to Baslow as the vicar. He didn't stay long. He was appointed the Bishop of Sydney that November. Among his early tasks as bishop were the completion of Moore College for theological students and for St Andrew's Cathedral. Barker was almost 2 metres tall, dignified and scholarly in appearance. He was deeply evangelical, and his teaching was based simply on the Bible. Due to his immense height and his abstinence from alcohol, the term Bishop Barker was jokingly applied to the tallest beer glass available in late 19th century Sydney hotels. The Sydney North Shore private school, Barker College, founded in 1890, was named in honour of the bishop by its founder, Reverend Henry Plew. Barker suffered a stroke of paralysis in his later years and returned to Europe in the hope of recovering. There was an improvement for some months, but he died in Italy in March 1882. I don't know whether you guys can see this because it's quite a long way off in the distance here, but coming downstream here on the Derwent, there's a weir before it reaches this bridge. It's sort of there. It's a long way away though. I can hear it in the distance. Don't know whether you guys can see it properly though. Anyway, we are finished with Baslow and Bubnell now, or almost, because now we have to make our way to another hamlet which sits to the east of all of this. It's called Robin Hood, and it's got another pub. Using the car, we have something else to see before we drive away from Baslow. To the east of the village is a small hamlet called Robin Hood on the A619. It's not much more than a collection of isolated houses, a B&B and a pub, but it still falls within Baslow and Bubnell and therefore needs a mention. The pub is called the Robin Hood Inn. Whilst the exact origins of the inn itself are unclear, it's known to be situated on a significant road near a moorland crossing. This suggests it was possibly early medieval in origin. The hamlet where the inn is located was originally part of a large area called Moorside. It's a small community, well known for the inn and for its car park, because it's a well-known spot for climbers who come to practice their skills on the nearby crags. The hamlet nestles in a small side valley high up on the road to Chesterfield. To the east are the slopes and cliffs of the East Moors, defined by many edges. Here's a bit about them. Between Robin Hood and Baslow are the Edges, a long line of cliffs which dominate the Derwent Valley. To the north of Robin Hood are Birchen Edge and Gardham's Edge. To the south is Dob Edge. Birchen Edge is a gritstone rock face popular with walkers and novice climbers, as most of the climbing routes are in the lower grade. It's known for Nelson's monument and the 3 ships' rock carvings, both commemorating Admiral Lord Nelson and his victory at the Battle of Trafalgar. The monument is a 3-metre-high gritstone column erected in 1810 by John Brightman, a local man from Baslow. The 3 ships are natural rock outcrops carved with the names of Nelson's ships. Gardham's Edge is best known for an archaeological feature. It's a cup and ring marked stone or petroglyph, first discovered in the 1940s. It's buried under a replica to protect it from weathering and other damage. Another replica of it is on display at the Weston Park Museum in Sheffield. In 2012, it was postulated that a standing stone at Gardham's Edge could be a gnomon of a seasonal sundial, possibly dating back to the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age period. Quarries on the edge may have been worked by the Gardham family, potentially giving rise to the name Gardham's Edge. Dob Edge has connections to quarrying, ancient trackways and the Chatsworth estate. It's believed the name Dob may be related to local folklore of imps, or maybe even a personal name. To the north of Baslow is Baslow Edge, which was once quarried for gritstone. It features the Eagle Stone, an isolated 6-metre-high block of gritstone. According to tradition, local men had to climb this rock before they were worthy of marriage. Just behind it is the monument to the Duke of Wellington. It was raised in 1866 by Dr. Wrench. He certainly got around a bit. It marked an earlier visit by Wellington to the moor and was also intended as a balance to Nelson's monument. With Baslow and Bubnell completed, we can head off again. Don't for 1 second think that you've seen the last of those gritstone edges. Baslow Edge is just one of them. Continue northwards and you'll find more. Tomorrow, if the weather holds out, we should get a great view from the top of the next one. Join me there and we'll see what happens. Hello folks, welcome back to the Derbyshire Dales once again. Now in today's episode we will be seeing some beautiful views. From the top of one of these magnificent gritstone escarpments. I'm only halfway up the escarpment at this point right here, but already my view is mega. Check this out. Now down there is the village which this all belongs to. It's the one which is over the Derwent from Carver, if you can remember that episode a few months ago. This is Curbar. Curbar, Cordar's Fort. With Baslow behind us, there are 3 left in the northeastern corner of the Derbyshire Dales district, all 3 of which are going to involve some pretty steep gradients. Today we're in Curbar, the village that sits on the opposite side of the River Derwent to Carver. You may recall we crossed the river to get to Curbar in that episode before turning around again. Curbar is very much Carver's little brother. Situated a mile north of Baslow on the edge of the Derwent, Curbar is very tight, narrow and built into a huge hillside. It's one of the most expensive villages in the entire country. Indeed, there's one street called Bar Road that has the highest average house value in Derbyshire. Curbar has a limited number of landmarks, but some of them are quite unusual. Here we'll take in the run-of-the-mill stuff like the church, the pub and the school for example, but how many observatories have we seen on TVI? Not many. There's one of them here though. Curbar also has a college to cover too, a short way from that. To the east are an array of popular rock climbing escarpments which form Curbar Edge and Baslow Edge. Formed millions of years ago when Derbyshire was under the sea, the edges have been used not just by rock climbers in their time, but also by paragliders, birdwatchers and even artists. We'll be climbing onto Curbar Edge to get a good look at the view they offer us at the top. There are some good bits to discuss in this one too, like the old Maybow custom, once performed by the villagers, but now only undertaken by children attending the local primary school. It's rough and rocky out here, so let's get our boots on and go climbing. So, yesterday we spoke at length about the East Moors at the end of the Baslow and Bubnell episode. We saw in pictorial form some of the various edges to the north of Baslow. Curbar Edge is another, except this time we're off to see it for ourselves. A gritstone moorland escarpment above the main village, Curbar Edge is on average 958 feet above sea level. The elevation varies depending on where you are. At its lowest point you're still 387 feet above sea level, the highest point is almost 1300. It's regarded as a significant location for rock climbing, both regionally and nationally, in terms of both the historical development of the sport and as the location of first ascents. Curbar Edge was formed millions of years ago. It was within the delta of a vast stream that deposited sand and dust across southern Britain. Because of currents and tides, muds deposited in deeper water became shales and the sands became gritstone. That's what Curbar Edge is. The edges are characteristic overhangs formed by erosion underneath the harder gritstone top of the moorland. Particularly severe wind erosion in the extremely cold and dry conditions during the last glacial period picked out the weaker layers. This defined the sculptural features of the edge today. A range of prehistoric remains are located in the area around Curbar Edge. Ancient cairns exist to the east near Froggatt Edge and to the west in Stoke Flat West. On Curbar Edge itself is a round cairn that's dated to the Bronze Age. It's a prehistoric funeral monument with a single burial placed inside, covered in a gritstone cist. The cairn was discovered in 1913 by John Manners, the 9th Duke of Rutland, and his gamekeeper. Manners was the owner of the land at that time. The edge is loaded with other things to discover. Take the Bible stones, for example, created by Edwin Gregory, a former mole catcher for the Duke of Devonshire. The Romans are believed to have been the first people group to exploit Curbar's gritstone resources. Curbar Gap at the southern end of the edge is crossed by a Roman road. That would have provided them easy access for quarrying. Curbar Gap was also important for another reason, the transportation of salt. In the 11th century, traders carrying salt from Cheshire to Yorkshire, Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire did so using pack horses. One of the viable pack horse routes, discovered in 1272, led to Buxton from Fairfield and through Saltersford. Traders would use Curbar Gap to reach Chesterfield, entering the town via Saltergate. There are no quarries on the edges these days. There are many former and assumed quarry sites though. Exact quarry locations are often unknown. What is known is that the Curbar Edge quarry sat within one of 4 areas of Derbyshire that produced millstones to grind grey flour. Millstone production on Curbar Edge came to an end at some point in the early 19th century, most likely 1811. Curbar Edge today is a great spot for rock climbing. Some of the earliest known climbing activity was done by Peak District pioneer Jim Puttrell. Very early climbing attempts were made on Curbar in the 1900s, but it was finally ascended by Chapman and Tomset of the Polaris Mountaineering Club in 1948. By 1999, there were over 150 different named rock climbing routes on Curbar Edge, in addition to a wide range of bouldering problem routes. In July 2015, 3 routes at Curbar named Dr. Dolittle, The Zone and Knocking on Heaven's Door were ranked within the top 20 hardest traditional climbs in the UK. Because of its particular conditions, Curbar Edge is also a suitable hang gliding and paragliding location for expert pilots. Curbar Edge is a great spot for bird watchers too. Dippers, robins, blackbirds, herons, pheasants, sparrows and great tits can all be found here. Birds of prey like barn owls, buzzards, kestrels and little owls are also frequent visitors too, and vital parts of the local ecology. On land, other animals such as Highland cattle or grouse define the area. The path along Curbar Edge is part of several long-distance walks, including the 25-mile eastern edges of the Peak District. We last touched that in Hathersage when we climbed Stanage Edge. Curbar Edge is cited in the title of the poem Night on Curbar Edge, written by William Watson. In art, the edge was painted by the local Derbyshire artist Martin Davis in 2013. And Curbar Edge is featured in several films, including 1984's Threads, 1996's The Big Issue, 1998's Hard Grit, 2009's Grit Flick, and 2012's Wide Boys. When I looked at the weather forecast this morning, it said there was some rain due to come across, but it hasn't materialised. We still have beautiful blue sky, don't we? And that is what you want when you're climbing Curbar Edge, or Baslow Edge, or Birchen Edge, or any of the other edges around here. You definitely want the weather to look good. And it is. Beautiful, isn't it? Let's drive down into Curbar Village now. Curbar is a very tight and narrow little place. It's built into a hillside which slopes down into the Derwent Valley. Now, due to the gradients involved in its upper reaches, I've decided the best way to cover most of this is by using the car as opposed to walking. We will get a little walk at the end though. The landscape here hasn't changed much over the last 500 years, and the view from Curbar Edge is still considered one of the finest in the country. Early records of the name Curbar include Cordberg in 1203, Cordsburr in 1285, Quardborough in 1346, Cordbor in 1356, Corberg in 1365, Corsbur in 1423, and Corber in 1577. All of those translate to originally being Corder's fortified place. The personal name is not absolutely certain, as a number of possible names would fit instead. Now here's a little known fact. Mention the plague to anyone and the first village they'll think of out here is Eyam. Curbar was also a plague village. It has the dubious honour, if you can call it that, of hosting the plague before it ever got to Eyam. It has tombs of plague victims dated 1632. That's 30 years before Eyam was hit. Curbar's plague graves are evident in several parts of the village. The most famous are the Cundy graves, which are occupied by members of the Cundy family. Victims of the plague in 1632, they were farmers at Grislowfield Farm. It's not known who buried the family, but we do know who lies in the graves. They belong to Thomas and Ada Cundy and their children Olive, Nellie and Thomas Jr. They each have a slab carved with their initials. Other Curbar plague tombs can be found below the Wesleyan Reform Chapel further down the village. Grislow Field still exists, by the way. The name is Saxon and means gristly open land. The area is not very good agriculturally, and it only has a thin layer of soil. It's very rocky otherwise. Now trust me, it's got some good landmarks, has Curbar Village, and the first one of them is one that's just to the north of Lane Farm. And here it is, there. Now, look at that very strange shaped building. What could that be, I wonder? Let's find out. We will be making several stops as we drive through the village because there are some quite incredible landmarks here. How about this place for starters? Known as the Jagger House, this is a lockup built in around 1780. It was used to hold prisoners in overnight custody while they were in transit to other prisons or court hearings. It has an unusual conical shaped roof and stands alone in the corner of a field not far from the Cundy Graves, northeast of Lane Farm. It has 2 rooms, one up and one down. A chimney was built in later years for a fireplace on the ground floor when it was converted into a dwelling, and it's said to have been inhabited until just before the start of World War II. One local tradition says that this was used as a pest house, a commonly owned building often on the fringes of villages that were struck down with the plague or other infectious ailments. The idea was that the victims could be rehoused in them until the illness took its course, resulting in either recovery or indeed death. Think of it as an early form of quarantine. For Curbar, this would have been the ideal spot. It was close enough to keep an eye on, but far enough away from the main body of population to avoid contagion. Since it was built in 1780, it's unlikely that it would have been used to house plague sufferers, but could have taken anyone suffering from just about anything, including leprosy or cholera. As domestic accommodation, it's known a sailor called Francis Pelly lived here, as well as a local deaf-mute named Ebenezer Barrett. He was known as Yebby and was the last permanent resident. And even though this road that runs down to Lane Farm here is private, you can still see the Jagger House perfectly legally because that footpath that we were on just there runs right past the building and you can get a really good view of it. Now, we're going to drive around the rest of Curbar now. Now, there's quite a lot of steep hills, lots of gradients around here, so the car is definitely the best way to do this. Back in the car, let's head for the centre of the village next, defined by a well and a flagpole. Curbar has a history of farming, although the number of farms has decreased to 0 over the past century. The population, though, has remained relatively stable. In 1891 there were 336 inhabitants, and in 1895 there were 16 farms. Today there are no working farms, but the number of inhabitants has increased. Curbar used to be part of the Duke of Rutland's estate until the 1920s. In 1927, the Duke sold Curbar off at a public auction in Bakewell. Most of the tenants bought their own properties and family descendants still own several of them now. Spreading out from the centre of the village are lanes of very exclusive, large houses. Curbar has the highest average house value of any village, town or city in Derbyshire. So here we are at the centre of the village, small with a cluster of lovely stone cottages at its heart. Check this out, this here is an unusual well surrounded by millstones. At one point this was the main water supply for the village. Next to the well is a tall flagpole. I guess you could define that as being the dead centre. Okay, if you turn left at the well there, you come down into this area here, which is a bit flatter than everything I've seen so far here in Curbar. Now, we've come down here to see an old chapel, which is somewhere there. Ah, there we are, there it is, hiding behind this house here. Down the hill slightly, we come to Curbar's Methodist Chapel, built in 1861. It's located on Chapel Walk. It's a single-storey, 2-bay structure made of coarse rubble gritstone with a Welsh slated roof. The chapel features a prominent gabled porch and tall rectangular windows. It was established by the Wesleyan Reformed Church and was built after Carver's Primitive Methodist Chapel, which is now Carver Methodist Church. We saw that a while back now. Now, speaking of Methodism, Curbar has a lot more to tell us about it. If you leave the village centre to the south, you'll see what I mean. We've got 2 landmarks to see that aren't at first all that obvious when you drive through Curbar. They both sit on a road called Cliff Lane. That's this one we're on now. Narrow and surrounded by typical Derbyshire dry stone walls, this begins fairly flat but starts to dip down considerably towards the end. About halfway down the hill is a very unusual property, one we don't see many of at all. It's an old observatory. These days it's a guest house and it has some pretty decent reviews if you know where to look online. Now, why would Curbar have an old observatory? Well, when it was in operation it was used by Henry Guinness, a writer on prophetic subjects, Roman Catholicism, science and philosophy. He also had an interest in astronomy. He built this observatory on Cliff Lane, equipping it with a powerful telescope. Combining his love of writing and his observations of the night sky, he wrote a book. It was called The Approaching End of the Age, and in it he postulated that the world would end soon, probably in 1919. He was, of course, totally wrong. It's a good job that Guinness had other things to say about the world, and other things to occupy his time too. That brings us to Cliff College, further down the hill. Cliff College has been an important local landmark in Curbar since 1883. Today it provides training and seminars for the Methodist community. It's based within a property called Cliff House. To understand this, we need to know a bit more about Henry Guinness. As well as being an astronomer and a writer, he was also the founder of Harley College in London. That was an evangelical training school, and a really good one at that. It became so successful that it needed a larger home, and this was to become it. It's believed the site for Cliff College was first offered to Henry Guinness by Elizabeth Hume, the widow of a recorder from Salford. Elizabeth was the daughter and heiress of Thomas Gardam, the last in the male line of the family of Gardam, who had lived at Cliff House for several generations previously. Cliff House was built in 1790 by Gardam. His son-in-law, James Hilton Hume, Elizabeth's husband, extended the house and built a congregational chapel for public worship. This had regular baptisms and weddings and some form of schooling for local children. In 1876, Cliff House was finally acquired by Henry Guinness. He spent an astonishing £15,000 on beautifying the grounds of his new property, which he renamed Hume Cliff College. It quickly became a centre for training missionaries until 1901. Many of those missionaries went on to work in South America and China, with over 50 of them laying down their lives in the Congo. The wider story of Cliff College is deeply rooted in the work of the Methodist minister Thomas Champness, who in 1883 launched the hugely influential Joyful News newspaper. His Joyful News training home and mission was later encompassed by the Wesleyan Methodist Church, which in 1904 moved the college to its present location under Principal Thomas Cook. At that time, the site had a massive astronomical observatory, built by Guinness of course, and below it was a museum containing Cook's magnificent collection of shells and missionary trophies. Cook died shortly before World War I to be succeeded by the Reverend Samuel Chadwick, a big name in the history of the college. It was he who established the team mission, a major and ongoing event. In office throughout World War I, Chadwick witnessed the transfer of students to the battlefields and the closure of the college until 1919. The campus was further extended in the 1930s with the addition of Chadwick Memorial Chapel and a tea hall large enough to feed hundreds during major gatherings. Cliff closed again as a college for the duration of World War II, when the premises were occupied by the Sheffield High School for Girls. Under Chadwick, the annual Whitsuntide anniversary used to attract some 5,000 visitors, far too many to be accommodated on site. Large numbers took to bed and breakfasts in private homes around Carver and Curbar. The gatherings were so big they required specially chartered anniversary trains. These included the famous Hallelujah Express from London to Grindleford. Large crowds would walk across the fields to Cliff from Grindleford station. The greatest ever anniversary meeting was in 1954, when 60,000 came to hear the American evangelist Billy Graham. The crowds arrived via 1,000 coaches, hundreds of cars and buses running shuttle services from Sheffield, Chesterfield and Grindleford station. Graham was a regular visitor to the college during the Whitsuntide gatherings of the 1960s, but he never managed to top the madness of 1954. Although it was rare for Cliff students to carry out any paid work, some were allowed to provide labour when the Derwent Dams project reached the vicinity of the college. In more recent times, Cliff has played other unsung roles. When Stony Middleton was flooded in 1968, for instance, students were quickly on hand to help the villagers out. Today, there's a playgroup on the Cliff campus serving the surrounding community, whilst the conference centre hosts groups from far and wide and of all religious persuasions. The anniversary weekend has now developed into a festival held over the spring bank holiday every year. So now it's time for a walk, and it's not going to be a long one this. Most of the village has already been covered using the car. Curbar's main landmarks, 4 of them, all sit next to the Derwent. The earliest educational establishment in Curbar seems to have been something called Ford School, which was set up in the late 17th century. Modern schooling is provided by Curbar Primary School, which serves the 3 villages of Curbar, Carver and Froggatt. This school is the custodian of an old May custom known as the Maybough. On the 1st of May, or as soon as possible thereafter, a tree branch is brought into the school and decorated with flowers by the children. It's known then as the Maybough. It's taken to various points in Curbar and Carver, where it's displayed to the accompaniment of songs and a dance. Several attempts have been made to ascertain the origin of the Maybough. The event was originally performed by the villagers rather than the school. Since World War I, though, it's been a school tradition. The second of the 4 Derwent side landmarks is one we've seen briefly before. This is the Bridge Inn, which we last captured when we crossed the river from Carver to this very point. The Bridge Inn that stands here today is not the original. It's believed to stand on the site of a previous structure. The original Bridge Inn is believed to have been built in the 1700s, with the current building constructed in 1930 using stone from the original. The bridge stands as an ancient crossing point of the Derwent. This and the packhorse trade route between Sheffield and Manchester was key to the development of Curbar. Yeah, there is a certain sense of deja vu stood here right here at the moment, because obviously the bridge there, which we crossed to get to Curbar when we were in the Carver episode, is very familiar, and of course so is the Bridge Inn too. It's a bit weird. We're on the other side of the bridge, and at first it feels like a whole different world, but when you get to this point here, it does feel very familiar. Now the next landmark was supposed to be this thing you can see to the right hand side of shot here. Now that, as far as I was aware before coming here, was the village hall, but apparently it's not. It's a scout hut. I thought it was the village hall, but never mind. It doesn't matter. It's a scout hut and it's there. We've covered it. That means we can skip forward straight to our last landmark, which is in the other direction, and that would be this church. Curbar's church is dedicated to All Saints. This was built in 1868 on land made available by the Duke of Rutland. The school soon followed suit in 1871, by the way, with an adjacent house built for the schoolmaster. The ecclesiastical parish of Curbar was formed in 1869 from that of Baslow St Anne and included the townships of Carver and Froggatt. It would be a few years before it got its own church, but this small edifice of stone in the early English style does for the village quite nicely. It consists of a chancel, a nave of 3 bays, a south aisle, a south porch, and a small western turret containing 1 bell. There are 350 sittings inside. And so, with all that visited, our last task is a simple one, driving north to the next one. Tomorrow we're going to be in a place that's similar to Curbar, just a scaled down version. There's more rock climbing to be done, and we'll also get a look at one of Derbyshire's lesser known pubs. See you there, everyone. Welcome back to the Derbyshire Dales again, folks. Now, yesterday, if you watched the Curbar episode, you'll already know I sort of chickened out of all the gradients in that village. Can't really avoid them in this place, though. If you want to walk around this one, you have to face some hills. Let's go. This is Froggatt. Froggatt, Frog Cottages. In the Dales today, we're taking a look at a small village that lies on the A625, the road to Sheffield. This is the lovely Froggatt, whose name sounds like something to do with a jumpy amphibious animal. It's actually not wrong. Froggatt means frog cottages because it's believed this is where a lot of them could once be found along the damp edges of the River Derwent. In 1203, Froggatt was recorded as Froggate, suggesting this was originally Frog Street. Later it was called Frogcotes, so you can see where the cottages part comes in. Froggatt used to be part of the manor of Baslow, but in the 13th century Baslow was divided into two parts. One part went to the Vernon family and the other to the Bassets. Froggatt would fall within the part owned by the latter. As a small village today, Froggatt is one of those that can be easily walked around, despite the fact there are some hills involved. It has just the one place of worship, a former Wesleyan chapel. It also has a pub called the Chequers Inn. Where the River Derwent passes through the village, there's also a notable bridge, one which has two arches of differing shapes and sizes. Towering over it all is the huge Froggatt Edge, another of the gritstone escarpments running north from Baslow to Hathersage and beyond. At the top of the crag is a heather moorland, often covered with purple bloom at this time of year. So this one should be pretty quick, all things considered. We don't have a lot of walking to do, and it's a nice, easy route. I wonder, are there any frogs out here these days? You never know. I'm sure if one does appear, it'll be something to croak about. Let's go. Froggatt, as we know it today, has been here since at least the 13th century. The name derives from its low-lying and once damp situation in the Derwent Valley. Frogs loved that, it seems. The early settlers in the village lived within two farmsteads and a number of gritstone cottages. By the 17th century, Froggatt was a small hamlet. The drainage was good, the soil was rich, and there were many springs that yielded good water. The oldest property still standing is Derwent Farm in the centre of the village, dated 1653. Coming from Curbar along the A625, you could so easily miss most of Froggatt if you don't know where to go. Froggatt sits on the A625, yes, but most of it is on a minor road just off that. Froggatt is situated beneath the gritstone escarpment of Froggatt Edge on the well-wooded banks of the River Derwent, between the villages of Grindleford and Carver. Like Curbar, it was once owned by the Duke of Rutland, who, 200 years ago, had 17 cottages built here by some local stonemasons for some of his workers. Some of those original cottages are still standing, several of which are now listed buildings. Froggatt hasn't expanded much since those times. It has a smattering of newer houses which have filled in gaps here and there, but for the most part it's still the same village as it was all those years ago. Any sort of building expansion would be tough out here anyway. Froggatt's position on the Derwent Valley slopes isn't the easiest task for any would-be house development plans. Well, it's not an easy start to this walk around because first job is to use this footpath which links the old, the main road through Froggatt to the other main road through Froggatt. That'll make a bit of sense to you in a moment. The trouble is, this path is really overgrown. There's nettles all over the place. It takes us though to the pub, the Chequers Inn. That is one of the hardest paths I've ever had to follow. To make it even worse, halfway down there's a dry stone wall which has fallen over. I had to climb over that, which wasn't easy. Anyway, should be back on terra firma now because here's the road. So up these steps, let's go and find this pub, shall we? I fancy a pint now after that. Froggatt isn't laden with a lot of landmarks, but there are a few. It has one pub, namely the Chequer or Chequers Inn, and that's on the A625. Let's have a look at it. The earliest reference to a building on this site dates from 1591, when a man called George Marples and his family resided here. Originally 4 17th century cottages, the Chequers Inn is now an immaculately maintained hostelry and a favourite with walkers and tourists exploring the Peak District. There are still reminders of the pub's past, thanks to an equine mounting block outside the pub and Welsh dressers and settles in the bar. There's even a secret woodland garden at the back. It's believed that Jacob, one of George Marples' children, opened the first alehouse here. Not much is known about it until 1735. That's when the present inn was opened by Thomas Marples, and by the late 18th century it had become of some prominence. It was during this period that body snatchers from Eyam would call into the pub for a flagon of ale as they made their way to carry out macabre deeds in the graveyards of Sheffield. There are no such people these days, and even if there was, this pub wouldn't let them in. Nowadays, the Chequers is a bustling, stylish pub with no tolerance for that sort of riff-raff. Owned by the Tyndall family since 2002, the Chequers is ideally positioned to explore the Peak District by car, on foot or by bicycle. It has a dog-friendly area adjacent to the bar which welcomes the well-behaved. And the dogs are welcome too, if they're nice. To get to our next landmark, we have to use a footpath that will take us from the pub to a minor road. Between the two is a blanket of trees. Sitting below the crags of Froggatt Edge on the valley slopes heading down towards the Derwent is a forest of birch trees, and this path winds its way through part of it. Paths originating on the crags making their way through these trees are common. Under your feet is gritstone, which is often worn away thanks to footpath erosion. That means when you use them, you find yourself walking on a lovely warm-coloured sand, a notable characteristic of this part of the Peak District. The fact Froggatt has a covering of trees is not a coincidence, by the way. The leafy nature of the village is the result of a bequest from a Lady Riverdale. The bequest saw 16 acres of woodland given to the National Trust in memory of her parents, Charles and Josephine Bingham. The 16 acres would go on to be known as Froggatt Wood. The wood is a truly peaceful and secluded spot, affording good footpaths to Nether Padley and Grindleford Bridge. In the springtime, it's a joy to see the floor covered in bluebells. This path isn't very long, and no sooner have you entered the wood, the road appears at the other end. It's time to check out what the Derwent looks like here. Okay, we've reached the road again, and behind me there's a house called Riverside, a very appropriate name actually because the Derwent is very close to us now. If we continue down this road heading north, the Derwent will appear on the left hand side, and the river of course is very interesting. We've seen it a few times, the Derwent around here, but we're interested in the bridge here. Froggatt sits close to a sharp meander in the Derwent. Where the river almost touches the road, there's a small bridge, but this one's interesting thanks to its shape and size. It has two arches, both of which are different, but they do the same job. The bridge was built in around 1653. Its main job is to provide a passage across the Derwent to the villages of Eyam and Stony Middleton, but it also, by default, gives Froggatt access to Stoke Hall. Stoke Hall is a fine house once lived in by William Cavendish, the man who spent nearly £1 million losing his estates in the Civil War. Stoke Hall was built using stone from its own quarry, still worked in the woods nearby. Across this bridge from Froggatt, the road leads up to an old toll cottage by its side. Stoke Hall has had many incarnations and many owners over the centuries. The first was Gerbert de Stoke in 1204. The present hall was built in around 1757. It was designed by James Payne, although he had some help from James Booth, the gifted Stony Middleton builder who contrived the octagonal church there. It passed through the ownership of a succession of Sheffield businessmen before being turned into a hotel and restaurant for a while. It was once the seat of the Simpson family too. In the 19th century, Stoke Hall was allegedly the scene of a murder when a servant called Flora was brutally killed there. Her employers erected a statue named Fair Flora to her memory. For a while, it was reputed to move positions in the woods. Her ghost is said to still haunt the hall to this day. And if you stand on the bridge, it is possible to see the top of Stoke Hall from here. You can't see much of it because there's a load of trees, generally speaking, in the way, but it is there. I'll try and point it out to you. It's just there, in fact. Now that actually falls within the parish of Grindleford because the Derwent here is the parish boundary. We'll talk a bit more about Grindleford though tomorrow. We have Froggatt to finish first, so let's do it. Now we're into the main village cluster, defined mainly by 18th century stone-built cottages that form a delightful ensemble. The least pretentious building in Froggatt, standing close to a bend in the road, is a Wesleyan Reform chapel, the only place of worship Froggatt has ever had to its name. Its sheer undemonstrative charm is wholly appropriate. It bears the date 1832, but the Methodist Reform movement was only formed in 1859. That means this was something else beforehand. In all likelihood, this little building either began life as a barn or something similar, or perhaps it was a mainstream Wesleyan chapel. During its time, it's played an important role in the life of the village. It's part of the Bakewell Wesleyan Reform Circuit. Adjoining it was presumably the former manse, a very early 19th century building with a pair of listed 17th century cottages beyond it. So from this point onwards, Froggatt is all residential. It's basically 3 streets: Moorlands Lane, Malthouse Lane and the Green. Let's wind our way through these back to the start. This is where the hills come into play, because at the end of this walk on Moorlands Lane we are climbing a very steep hill. You may have noticed I'm zigzagging across the road here because this makes the gradients a little less severe. On the Strava map it's going to look awesome at the end of this episode. Now, this isn't the biggest hill around here by any stretch of the imagination, because Froggatt of course has another edge like the one we climbed yesterday in Curbar. Let's talk a bit about that. To the north and east of Froggatt is the massive Froggatt Edge, another gritstone escarpment similar to the one at Curbar which we saw yesterday. The name Froggatt Edge applies only to the northernmost section of the escarpment because the middle and southernmost sections are Curbar Edge and Baslow Edge respectively. In Froggatt, the edge can be seen as rocky crags against the skyline. At the top is a managed heather moor, which is often coloured purple with bloom in late summer. Part of the moor management involves periodically burning sections to discourage reforestation and promote fresh heather shoots. As with many of the gritstone edges in the Peak District, Froggatt's was used as a source for making millstones. A number of half-completed ones can still be found at the bottom of the edge here. Froggatt Edge is frequented by rock climbers and hill walkers throughout the year, much like the edges at Curbar, Baslow, Birchen, Dob and Garden. Froggatt Edge in rock climbing circles is seen as the second most popular of the East Moor edges, second only to Curbar. Due to its position, it avoids the worst of the weather too. Froggatt is famous for its slabs. Joe Brown popularised 2 well-known classic routes up Froggatt Edge in the late 1940s, named Sunset Slab and 3 Pebble Slab. One of the best-known climbs at Froggatt Edge is called Downhill Racer, a smooth and near-vertical 17-metre slab of gritstone first climbed in 1977 by Pete Livesey. When compared to Curbar, climbing Froggatt Edge is not considered difficult, but even so, a fall from it would still definitely result in some injuries. Now, Froggatt Edge is often visited for another reason. It has a stone circle. Somewhat damaged and embanked, this circle stands just a few metres east of the edge. It's located towards the western edge of the plateau of land known as Stoke Flat, which gives the site its alternate name of Stoke Flat Circle. Likely Bronze Age date-wise, the circle consists of 14 small Derbyshire gritstone blocks, most about half a metre tall, with only one that reaches just over a metre in height. The stones form a double ring with 7 set into the inner edge and 5 set into the outer edge of the bank. The whole monument is about 15 to 16 metres in diameter. Several authors suggest that there were originally 16 to 18 stones here. Peak District archaeologists have suggested several celestial alignments which would explain their arrangement. As the site is located on land that dips sharply westwards with the horizon to the east blocked by higher ground, the position is believed to involve the setting sun over Eam Moor. However, the most intriguing alignment from Froggatt Edge involves not the sun, but the midsummer moon, and it might be connected to another circle we already know. When seen from the circle, the moon's maximum is set between the stones of the southern entrance and directly behind the distant henge and circle at Arbor Low on Middleton Common. Arbor Low would already have been several hundred years old by the time Froggatt Edge gained this circle, but the design and orientation of it is likely to have been a deliberate act. These small stone circles were designed to serve the needs of local communities, but farming groups out here were not isolated, they were part of a larger whole. Perhaps they viewed themselves and other local communities as having a shared regional identity and a set of belief systems. That would explain the connection between Froggatt and Arbor Low. That will do us for Froggatt. We didn't come across any frogs, which was mildly disappointing, but never mind. It's a great little village and very popular for many reasons. The same can be said for our final parish this week. The last one in the northeastern corner of the Dales sees us take on a village famed for a gorge. See you there tomorrow. Hello folks, welcome back to the Derbyshire Dales for the last one in the run this week, and the last one in the northeastern corner of the Dales as well. After this, it's all south from here. So we followed the Derwent from Froggatt, where we were yesterday, and we've now hit a fairly sizable village, except this village is more than one village. It's actually four of them all glued together. This is Grindleford. Grindleford, Grindstone Ford. Ending the week here in the Derbyshire Dales, we have the parish of Grindleford, again lying within the Derwent Valley. Grindleford is a large area, the main reason being because in 1987, four former parishes merged together to form Grindleford as we know it today. They were Nether Padley, Upper Padley, Stoke and Eam Woodlands. Grindleford is surrounded by some huge mountain-like hills. To the west is the huge 1,407-foot high Sir William Hill, which we drove across at the end of the Fullo episode a long time ago. Grindleford's pub is called the Sir William Hill in reference to it. To the southeast lies the gritstone escarpment of Froggatt Edge, and to the north is the beautiful Padley Gorge. Padley is perhaps the place most visitors to Grindleford are familiar with. There's a number of reasons for that. First of all, the gorge itself is a great place for walkers and families looking for a fun, adventurous day out. Grindleford is popular with walkers and climbers due to its proximity to a variety of landscapes, including open moorland and wooded river valleys, including, of course, Padley Gorge. Padley also has a couple of historic sites, including the remains of an old chapel and a now demolished hall. It also has Grindleford railway station on the Hope Valley line. That's the first thing you see when you emerge from the second longest railway tunnel in the UK, Totley. Elsewhere, Grindleford has a church, which is a little unusual given what you can find in it, and a sports ground, a school, an ancient bridge, an old toll house, and even an art gallery if you know where to go. So, for one last time in the northeastern Dales, let's go. We start our walk on the main road through Grindleford from north to south. It's the B6251 or main road. It's generally residential in the early going here. Grindleford has a wonderful setting, lying in a natural amphitheatre amid wooded hills, almost surrounded by National Trust land. On the eastern skyline are the crags of Froggatt Edge. To the west, the flanks of Sir William Hill shelter the village, while the Longshore Estate and Padley Gorge bound the northern end of the parish. With the River Derwent flowing north to south through the village, it's a wonderful walking country. It's an uncomplicated, if rambling settlement, but its boundaries take a little unravelling. You see, Grindleford is not just one village, it's four: Stoke, Eyam Woodlands, Upper Padley and Nether Padley. These were all merged together in 1987. We already know about Stoke. We covered that yesterday in Froggatt because it made more sense to. The Padleys are to the north, so what's in the middle? The answer is Eyam Woodlands, even though most people know it as Grindleford now. Grindleford was only ever marked on early maps as something else. The earliest documented evidence is in the 1248 Derbyshire Charter, where it's mentioned as Grundleford. In the assize rolls of 1359, it's recorded as Grindleford Bridge. It's this latter name which gives us a clue as to how it further developed as a settlement. Grindleford Bridge was the name given to the actual bridge that crosses the Derwent here. Eyam Woodlands was centred around Grindleford Bridge 150 years ago. To the south lay Stoke, and between the two it was just a road with a tannery on the right of it before you hit a turning into the main village. It's a bit different now. Most of Main Road is built up these days with a lot of houses on the left hand side. The right though is still open and wild. Mount Pleasant Garage provides our first landmark of any real note here, just before we reach the centre of civilization. This used to be the site of a pub many decades ago. It was called the Bell Inn, Beer House and Hostelry, and some years later it became Kenyon's filling station, selling petrol from some of Derbyshire's first multi-storage tanks. During the 1920s and 1930s, the Kenyon family operated motorbuses, which they had introduced to the Hope Valley after the loss of their horses. They'd all been acquired by the military to be used on the French battlegrounds during World War I. Kenyons would eventually close their pumps. That enabled the owners of Mount Pleasant Garage to be freed from a long-honoured agreement, and shortly afterwards they installed their own pumps here. There's no petrol here today though. So walking into Grindleford here, I'm surrounded by bunting, loads of bunting hung from the street lights and attached to houses. Look at this, loads of it. This is the time of year though that Derbyshire does this kind of stuff, you know, well dressing and stuff like that. I came through one of the villages earlier, I can't remember which one it was, which had its well dressed, so yeah, so we might see one here in Grindleford. Now we're in the oldest part of Grindleford, or Eyam Woodlands if you will. This little cluster of terraces and cottages surround a school and chapel on the B6001 that leads north to Hathersage. The village only has the one school, Grindleford Primary, which was rated good in its 2018 Ofsted report. This school has been here for over a century. It was opened in 1876 originally as Eyam Woodlands, Stoke and Nether Padley School, before later changing its name. In the early 2000s, local parents helped renovate the school, including adding its second floor, but the main body of the building has been in constant use since it first opened. The school is an active part of the Grindleford community and utilises the local environment for learning. You can hardly blame them for doing that, given where it all sits. Most of the present-day buildings in Grindleford originate from the days when the railways were being built across the country. Grindleford saw a newfound prosperity and needed better housing and improved facilities as a result. The village pub was quickly enlarged, and that's next. Not far from the school is the Sir William Hotel. Like the school, this has had some former names. It was called the Commercial, and before that it was called the Old Red Lion. The name now is a reference to the massive hill that we drove across the top of at the end of the Fullo episode. Leading steeply up from the hotel, the road over the hill goes to Bretton. The old road was at one time the Buxton to Grindleford Turnpike. It reaches a height of over 1,400 feet after leaving Buxton before descending 500 feet to Grindleford in little over half a mile. The name William Hill has absolutely nothing to do with gambling. So William Hill is said to date back to at least 1692, and there are several theories as to the naming of it. The hill bit is obvious, but the William in question is not. It seems there are three main candidates though: William Saville, William Cavendish and William Bagshaw. Bagshaw, who's portrayed on the hotel's signboard, was not born until 1771, after the turnpike road had been established. That actually makes him the least likely of the three. Saville was, in 1692, the lord of the manor of Eyam, but at the same time, Cavendish owned Stoke Hall. The chances are it's named for Cavendish, because money and power did a lot of talking. Okay, coming past the school and the Sir William, we find ourselves in the centre of civilization here. Now, there's a few things to talk about in the centre of civilization. One of them is the War Memorial, which you can see just there. We'll catch that in a second. Next, though, overlooking the pub, is this big Methodist chapel. So another thing that was quickly built after the railways came along was a large Methodist chapel. Standing opposite the hotel, this was opened in 1905. Methodism may have first arrived in Grindleford as early as 1766. We can maybe deduce that from the records of John Wesley himself. In his journal for the period the 27th of May 1765 to the 18th of May 1768, he records that on the 27th of March 1766 he preached in the morning at a little village near Eyam. That little village was reputedly Grindleford Bridge, and he may have been travelling here from Sheffield at the time. Wesley's visit may have been a consequence of an abortive attempt to introduce Methodism to Eyam in 1765. Thereafter, various directories record a Methodist chapel in Grindleford Bridge, built in 1830. Nothing remains now of that building, as it was replaced by the present chapel. The original village centre had been focused around this small green on the Hathersage Road where the War Memorial stands now. Although still relatively small during wartime, this community lost many of its finest young men in the two world wars. 16 perished in the carnage of the Great War and 12 in the Second, including 3 sets of brothers in the latter. This granite memorial is unusual in that it shows not only the names and ages of the fallen, but also gives the actual date on which they lost their lives. Sports now, and Grindleford has a really good set of facilities located on the banks of the Derwent. This is known as Bridge Playing Field, and the main building here is Bishop Pavilion. Grindleford Football Club play here. The club currently competes in the Hope Valley Amateur League, and they have a junior section in the Derwent Valley League. Grindleford Cricket Club are also based at Bishop Pavilion and Bridge Playing Field. The club have 3 senior teams, a first 11 Saturday team, a Sunday 11 friendly team, and a midweek 11 side. The impressive facilities of Bishop Pavilion serve as the main community and sports space in the village. There are other clubs and societies here too though, and lots of annual events. The Grindleford Gallop, for example, is a challenge event held in March. There's a village carnival held in June and a horticultural show in August. They are just some of the highlights of village life here. Okay, so once you've exited the playing field and the pavilion, you then see the main street again, right there. Now, if you were to head that way, towards where we started, you'd be missing half of Grindleford out, because there's another section to it, over a big bridge. But this hasn't been around for all that long. The section over the bridge is kind of new-ish. It was built when the railways came along. Let's check it out. Now, Grindleford is a village divided, spliced in two by the deep dark waters of the River Derwent, which meanders south in the bottom of the valley. Although split into 2 distinct sections by the river, getting over the Derwent here is easy thanks to this bridge. The present bridge was built in around 1758 and later widened. Underneath the arches, the joints where the ashlar blocks were joined when the bridge was widened can still be seen. By the 18th century, turnpike roads were established and Grindleford was at the meeting point of 3 of them. That brings us to the next landmark, over the river. On the other side of Grindleford Bridge there's a quaint little property known as Tollbar Cottage, and yes, this would have done exactly what it sounds like. This would have collected tolls from users of this road because it was a turnpike from 1759 onwards. It transported travellers from Newhaven through Grindleford and onto High Road and Ringinglow. The toll collector would have benefited from a 2-storey semicircular bay window which enabled him to look up and down the road to check for approaching customers. The house fell into disrepair when the turnpike closed in 1884, but it was renovated in the 1930s, and today I reckon this would make a fabulous little holiday home if the owners wanted it to. On the eastern side of the river are houses, villas and country retreats which were mainly constructed following the arrival of the Hope Valley Railway line at the end of the Victorian era. When Grindleford was in woodlands, to the east of the Derwent was a small hamlet called Nether Padley, consisting of a clutch of farm buildings mainly. They still exist, although now Nether Padley is a lot bigger. Most of it is hidden in the trees of a sylvan slope beneath the Gritstone escarpments to the north. Yeah, if it wasn't for modern maps, you'd struggle to see most of these houses because, to be honest with you, most of them are hidden from view. If you drive through Grindleford and up there towards Padley, you think you're in the middle of nowhere. I've done it a few times. All the houses are off to the right-hand side and they're all behind trees and shrubs and foliage and all sorts of things, basically. So we're not going to see much if we carry on up there. So what we'll do is we'll turn around at this point. But there is one thing on this side of the bridge that we still haven't seen, and that is the church. Now this is one of the unusual churches in Derbyshire, one of the most unusual, should we say. Nether Padley is also where you'll find Grindleford's church dedicated to St Helen. Prior to the coming of the railways, when Nether Padley was mainly undeveloped, there was no church here. But with the expansion of Grindleford, the building of a church was inevitable. This came along in 1909, just a few years after a railway tunnel was completed further up the valley. More on that later. The land this sits on was donated by the Maynard family. Designed by Richard Sutton and Frederick Gregory, this was intended to be a large Gothic revival structure. However, only the chancel, south chapel and vestries were completed before World War I. A temporary nave was also built and the church was given its dedication in 1910. A porch, kitchen and restroom were only added to the church in 1983. More recently, the church has gained another vital community use. As well as religious services, it's been adapted to serve as a community space for events, exhibitions and meetings. It's almost like a village hall, you could say. The church vestry also houses the Grindleford Community Shop. It was set up to provide a local shop for the village, and it's immensely successful. It sells artisan bread from Welbeck Bakery, as well as a range of other local products. Tea, coffee and locally baked cakes are also available here. This June, just gone, marked the 10th anniversary of establishing the shop in the church. It's proved a popular venture for both people in the village and passing walkers. At present, the shop is working with the church on a joint project which will see solar panels and batteries installed when the church is re-roofed. We're almost all the way around this walk, but we have one final thing to see before we reconvene with the car. If you cross back over the river, you'll see this building. This is the Derwent Gallery. It's a contemporary art gallery specialising in landscape paintings of the Peak District. It was established between 1995 and 1997. It's known for showcasing both traditional and modern styles of art featuring the region's varied landscapes. The gallery also offers bespoke picture framing services too. Nice stuff. And from here it's a simple case of just walking straight back up the main street to find the car, and that is the walk around Grindleford. However, we haven't quite finished with this one just yet, because we may have covered Grindleford, but we still need to cover some bits to the north of it. You remember earlier we mentioned there were 4 villages that form Grindleford these days. We've talked a bit about Eam Woodlands, we've talked about Nether Padley, we dealt with Stoke yesterday, so what about Upper Padley? Let's go check that out. Heading north away from the main village and after crossing the Derwent Bridge, we pass the Maynard Arms. Keep your eyes on the right of the screen and you'll see it. It dates back to at least 1857, with its name deriving from the Maynard family, who were lords of the manor in Padley. The current building was constructed in 1908, coinciding with the arrival of the railway to the area. It served as a hotel mainly, but also as a place for touring cricket teams. In fact, the Maynard gained fame for hosting internationally renowned sides, including an Australian team led by Don Bradman in 1938. It also played host to a West Indies team featuring Sonny Ramadhin and Alf Valentine in the 1950s. Today, the Maynard remains a 19-bedroom hotel and a wedding venue. So now we're in Upper Padley, the northernmost part of Grindleford. This has a lot of things for such a small little hamlet, including Grindleford railway station. The railway is a rare form of transport in the Peak District, with Grindleford being one of only a handful of villages afforded the luxury of an operating station. The station is a stop on the Hope Valley line between Manchester Piccadilly and Sheffield. It was opened in 1894 on what was originally the Midland Railway's Dore and Chinley line. The line opened up the previously isolated valley to day trippers to Padley Gorge and commuters from Sheffield, but it also provided a means of transport for stone from the local quarries. The original station buildings are still standing and now house a well-known cafe. Otherwise, the station is unstaffed. Trains to Sheffield take around 15 minutes from here. Grindleford Station Cafe, by the way, is a legendary establishment that's been run by the same family for 45 years. It sells huge portions of good, honest, quality food. Its chip butties and pints of tea, yes, you heard that right, are rightly famous across the Peak District and beyond. It's all worth a stop, but there's more to Padley than this. When you approach Grindleford Station on a train from Sheffield, it's the first thing you see after you emerge into the daylight from the second longest railway tunnel in the UK. Completed in 1893, Totley Tunnel is 3 miles and 950 yards long, a length that's only been beaten by the Severn Tunnel. The Channel Tunnel is longer still, but that's classed as international. The tunnel's construction brought the railway line to the Derwent and Hope Valleys and encouraged the building of many houses in the area as homes for Sheffield commuters. Basically, without the tunnel there would be no railway, and with no railway there would be no Grindleford. Well, not as we know it today anyway. Totley Tunnel runs under the expansive Totley Moor. It was constructed by the Midland Railway and the engineers were Parry and Story of Nottingham. Work began in 1888 with the construction of 3 brick surveying towers along the tunnel's proposed line, followed by vertical shafts to the level of the rails. The Duke of Rutland had decreed that no more than 1 ventilation shaft should be sunk through his land and that work should cease from August to October during the grouse shooting season. The tunnel was dug from both ends simultaneously, the headings finally meeting in 1892. It was hot and humid work, so for a time at the Padley end, a turbine was installed to drive a huge fan. Because of the damp conditions, the workforce suffered outbreaks of typhoid, diphtheria, smallpox and scarlet fever. During construction, a natural cavern several hundred square feet in area was discovered, which was incorporated into the tunnel. The entrance to the cavern can be seen halfway through it if you're on a train. Passenger services through the tunnel commenced in 1894. Ever since, it's been frequently used by both passenger and freight trains. Above ground, there are a number of ventilation shafts still visible on Totley Moor. Several shafts are visible in Dore too, from Strawberry Lee Road. So you recall on Tuesday I said that this part of the Dales does get very busy in the summertime, and even though Baslow wasn't particularly busy when I was there earlier today, Grindleford really is. There's a lot of people around the station cafe and around the station in general. I'm expecting to see quite a few people down here as well. Let's head on through Upper Padley, because at the end of this track there's even more. Now, the rest of Upper Padley is something of a hidden delight. Beyond the station, the line through it runs into a dead end, but people love coming up here. There are several reasons to. One reason is Padley Chapel, a Grade 1 listed building that stands not far from the railway line. Another is Padley Hall. These 2 buildings have a lot to tell us. The majority of Padley Hall is now in ruins. Sometimes called Padley Manor, it was a large double courtyard house. Etched with wealth, romance, devotion, faith and treachery, the story of the hall begins in around 1415 when Robert Eyre came home from Agincourt to marry his sweetheart Joan Padley. Robert initiated the building of a new manor at Padley, and their subsequent marriage produced 14 offspring. Only 1 female child reached adulthood though, Anne Eyre. Anne would marry an equally financially desirable suitor, Sir Thomas Fitzherbert, who was to inherit the Norbury estate near Ashbourne. They were Catholics and made Padley Hall their home, continuing in the Catholic faith, despite Elizabeth I at the time forbidding the following or preaching of Catholicism. Priests were ordained abroad as it was illegal in this country back then. They were treated as criminals guilty of high treason and punishable by death, as was anyone found harbouring them. Therefore, Sir Thomas Fitzherbert was regarded with suspicion and was eventually arrested in 1571. He wasn't the only one. It was here in 1588 where two Catholic priests named Nicholas Garlick and Robert Ludlam were discovered in hiding. 2 weeks later, they were hanged, drawn and quartered in Derby. They became known as the Padley Martyrs. Part of the hall, believed to be the central gatehouse range, survives. In 1933 it was converted to a Roman Catholic chapel in honour of the martyrs. This was after the chapel had been a site of pilgrimage for several years. Annual pilgrimages were set up by a priest from Sheffield, organised by the Guild of Our Lady of Ransom. Now here's another reason to come to Padley, Brunt's Barn. This is named after the MBE Harry Brunt, the former Deputy Peak District National Park Officer from 1951 until his death in 1980. His role was wide-ranging and included the development of ranger and warden services. A keen conservationist, he was also involved in developing access agreements. Part of his work also saw him restore former railway lines into walking and cycling routes, beginning with the Tissington Trail. He also created the National Park's information centres. Widely respected throughout the organisation, Harry's name lives on thanks to Brunt's Barn, which is a National Park volunteers centre. This barn was originally part of a farm complex and was redeveloped in the 18th century. It later became the National Park's Ranger Briefing Centre and Volunteers Centre. Well worth a look at Brunt's Barn, and so is Padley Chapel and the ruins of the hall as well. Now, despite the fact there's plenty of trees around here, as you can see there are loads of them, there's none here at the chapel or the barn, so it's bright sunlight and not very much shade at the moment for me. That's all about to change though, because we're going to walk our way back towards the station now, and when we reach the station we're going to take a left turn into those trees over there. We're heading for Padley Gorge. Here's a bit about Padley Gorge. It's a deep but narrow valley between Grindleford and the A6187. It's extensively wooded with a stream running through it called Burbage Brook. The stream used to form the boundary between Derbyshire and Yorkshire, but the boundary now follows the A6187 instead, the former route of the A625. Now, we are definitely in the UK here, but believe it or not, this is actually classed as a rainforest. It's one of the furthest inland examples of a temperate rainforest in the country. The gorge begins near Grindleford Station at a stile and continues up the valley towards Hathersage Road and Burbage. It finishes at the edge of the woodland. Padley Gorge forms the backbone of several walks in the area, and the railway station approach road forms a convenient car park for walkers. A short distance from the upper section of the gorge is the Fox House, a pub and hotel on the road to Sheffield. Longshore Estate is equally close, and its lands include the gorge. The valley is part of the Yarncliffe Wood, a site of special scientific interest first designated in 1972. It has a range of rare wildlife, flora and fauna. It includes 3 species of Umbilicaria lichen, said to be very rare in the Midlands, and it's a breeding site for pied flycatcher, wood warbler and hawfinch. Padley Gorge is a popular tourist spot and as of May 2020 has a 5-star rating on TripAdvisor. You can't argue with that, can you? Driving away from Grindleford now, the last thing to see within the parish boundary is a little known building on the edge of Padley Gorge. It's called the Granby Discovery Barn. Originally a gatehouse for Padley Hall, it was later used as a barn and cow shelter, but now it has several displays telling you the history of the area. I can't cover it all, of course, so it's worth popping in here to learn a bit more about Grindleford and Padley, as well as the local wildlife you can find in the gorge. And so, right on the parish boundary and the district boundary too with Sheffield is the Fox House. This popular pub marks our exit from the Dales and the completion of the northeastern corner. Fox House is theoretically in Yorkshire, not Derbyshire, but I will include this little nugget to finish with about it. The Fox House was originally called the Traveller's Rest, but was later renamed after the Fox family of Callow near Hathersage. The present inn was built in 1773 and was extended in the 1840s by the Duke of Rutland's agent. For many years, a large room here was known as the Duke's Room. That's because occasionally the Duke of Rutland himself would sleep overnight with his young sons. On one wall there used to be the stuffed head of a bull killed in 1886 and presented to the Duke. Fox House is also reputed to be Whitecross in the book Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. It's where Jane got down from the coach whilst fleeing to the fictional Morton, based on Hathersage. That's been a fascinating week, all things considered. I'll be leaving the Dales alone for a long time now, but I will be back next year. There's still loads more to cover in these lovely hills. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.